when you're in a startup world, you're really proving out a concept, proving out a process, proving out a service, whatever you're in. And so you have this vision of what you think it will be, and then you have reality of what it truly is, right? And there's growth, growing pains, I guess, along the way. And you got to go out and find customers that are willing to take the leap of faith with you early on. Like you said, those early adopters that know there might be some challenges, but want to be first to market, want to be a first mover in whatever segment they're in. So that's always the battle is, what do you think it's going to be? And then what is it truly, what is it when it actually comes to market, whether that's a service or product?
Welcome, everyone, to the 1% Edge podcast. Here we have the privilege of meeting amazing guests and having conversations about their own personal journey to get 1% better. And for today's topic, we're talking about surviving the startup world from ground zero to 100. What does it take, and what are some of the things you need to prepare yourself for in order to be successful? And to help us out with today's topic, I'm really honored to have Dustin Cosgrove, Director of Sales in the food and nutrition ingredients industry, and also a fellow podcaster. He hosts the Chasing Goalposts podcast. Welcome, Dustin.
Thanks, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here and join you today.
Awesome. I've been looking forward to it. All right, let's start with kind of defining the situation. When we say a startup, at ground zero, what does that mean to our audience?
Yeah, everybody thinks startups are the sexy thing to be a part of, right? And listen, they're exciting, but startups look like, hey, you walk into a office and you're hanging whiteboards and you've got zero business and you've got zero plan and you're creating things from scratch, and you say, I've got a product or service here and I need to go and find a customer to ultimately buy that at scale. And so really it's starting from scratch. It's very different than having an existing business that says, hey, I'm at $100,000 and I need to go to 500,000. How do I get there? This is really, how do you create a go-to-market plan and ultimately execute on that and get validation at the customer level?
All right. So let me tell you my little bit of experience that I've seen a lot there. A lot of times, like you said, they build a product. It's the bright, shiny object. Mm-hmm. They go and show it to a few folks, those early adopters, they start salivating. Oh my God, that is amazing. And they start coming on board. Founders start thinking, I'm on to something big. This is $1 billion business. And they start expanding and hiring real salespeople. And now you're forced to, like you just said, find that combination of who do we really sell to and in what situations. And a lot of times those early adopters, there's only so many of them. And you said a key word there, at scale. So when you try to get growth at scale, sometimes the product that we thought was the greatest thing since sliced bread may not be. Have you run into, or have you seen that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think when you're in a startup world, you're really proving out a concept, proving out a process, proving out a service, whatever you're in. And so you have this vision of what you think it will be, and then you have reality of what it truly is, right? And there's growth, growing pains, I guess, along the way. And you got to go out and find customers that are willing to take the leap of faith with you early on. Like you said, those early adopters that know there might be some challenges, but want to be first to market, want to be a first mover in whatever segment they're in. So that's always the battle is, what do you think it's going to be? And then what is it truly, what is it when it actually comes to market, whether that's a service or product?
All right. So I got a million questions for you, because one of them is, you start out and let's help our listeners understand what that world is kind of like. You start out and you wear many hats because there's not a business development team, a marketing team, a product marketing. There's only so many bodies having to do so many different functions. And in some ways it could be fun. Can you share what your experience has been as that? But in other ways it could be tough if you're used to process.
Yeah, and so good point. So I think when, in my experience anyways, we put together a really good leadership team, but that leadership team was really executors, right? There wasn't somebody that was sitting up in the ivory tower, downtown, whatever city you want to talk about. Those were people that we were all rolling up our sleeves. We were on the leadership team, but we were rolling up our sleeves and executing, because we know we had to build the business first and then hire staff behind the growth. and that's part of the dynamic. But really, it's creating that go to market plan. And so in my situation, when we were taking this new ingredient per se to market, myself, the VP of marketing, and really our director of R&D built the go-to-market plan with the help of others, obviously our CEOs and other people within the business. But really, we had to go and build that go-to-market plan, test it. I always say it's this process of understand, qualify, and validate. So you understand what you have, you qualify it internally, like, okay, we have this product, service, whatever it is. This is where we think it fits. We kind of validate that, and then we go out to the market and we truly have to validate it externally. So it's like understand what you have, qualify it internally so you know the value you're bringing, and then validate that in the external market. And if you start to see conversion in the external market, you're onto something. If you don't, back to the drawing board.
Okay. How quickly, have you seen organizations be able to course correct when they might be going in a avenue that wasn't what they thought it was going to be?
It's a tough question to answer, and it's different for every industry. But the industry we were in, the challenge for some of these longer sales cycle industries is it might take 6 or 12 months before you really realize, like, hey, we don't maybe have what we thought we had, or the product market fit isn't there, or the cost value proposition isn't there. So, in my experience, it was 6 to 12 months where we're like, okay, this isn't working. How do we pivot? Where do we pivot? What is working? What isn't? And that really, we're going to get into this probably a little bit, but really this is where KPIs come into play, because when you're in a startup, you don't have existing business to build off of. So you're showing progress. So as you track progress, you understand what's working, what's not. And then you can kind of look at the health of your business and your pipeline and say, is this really, am I working my way through the sales pipeline with these customers, or am I not? And, as salespeople, sometimes we can get emotional and say, I really like this customer, I really like this business. It feels good. But if you look at the KPIs, it's not moving forward. And then you have to kind of step back and say, hey, what's the health of this pipeline? And that's really how we looked at progress, was through KPIs and saying this is either is working or isn't working.
So I'm a big believer in measuring what matters. So when you talk about KPIs, any recommendations on how do you measure it? Because you can't, especially in a long sales cycle, you can't just measure it as I won it or I didn't.
Yeah, in our case, I measured, pipeline fill. So how many customers were coming into the top of the pipeline, right? Where you can look at that and say, okay, this many customers this month came in, we qualified them. And then really conversion was a big one, conversion rate. And conversion rate can be the time you get them to the top of the pipeline to the time you get them to sale, right? That's conversion rate. But you also need to track conversion through the steps in the sales pipeline. And when you're in a startup, if you're 12 months away from your first sale, how do you show progress in that first 12 months? You show progress through pipeline fill, conversion rate through the pipeline, the amount of, samples or sample material that you've sent out and validated, how many projects you have in the pipeline and where those projects are at. Really showing progress is so important, because you're not just showing the board and you're not just showing your investors, but you're showing yourself, and you're validating the work that you're putting in is actually being impactful.
So I'd assume it's easy to sometimes, let's talk about top of funnel, for example. Sometimes we throw everything in there. And then you did mention qualify, but we don't go the extra step to truly qualify some things sometimes. How do any recommendations on having that discipline? Because organizations I talk to that have a really clear, hey, this is our ideal customer profile. These are some of the key requirements they got to have for them to truly be qualified for us, and they kind of stick to their guns. I feel like they do a little bit better than the ones that throw anything that's moving in there.
Yeah, and I think that's what comes down to, setting up the appropriate KPIs as well. And so if you're tracking the right metrics, I think you see reality. If you're tracking metrics that don't make any sense, you're going to see what you want to see.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you say qualify, right, you set parameters. Like, so for us, it was like, if in the ingredient world, if you send a sample to a customer and that sample gets, hey, we like the sample, there's typically a process in whatever industry you're in, that like, okay, next steps are 3 unique lots and we have to start the documentation approval paperwork. So you kind of set up your KPIs to say, when it crosses into qualified territory, this is the step that you're in, the stage you're in. If it doesn't meet that criteria, it doesn't move into a qualified opportunity.
Fair. Let's talk about things, what's lifestyle like when going into one of these things? What's that work environment look like? We'll start with work environment, and then I'm going to back into that famous word that everybody likes to use this day, which is work-life balance. But let's get the work environment first.
I'm waiting for that work-life balance comment. Yeah. The listen, I think every startup's different. Usually they're exciting. I think the experience that I had, we had an amazing group. I will, fully transparent, and people have always said, "Hey, would you do it again with that group in a different scenario?" 100%, I would. And so obviously that wasn't the case. That's no longer the case. But at the end of the day, we had an amazing culture, amazing leadership, and really fun to be a part of. And even though you're in the trenches together, and you go through a lot of adversity, a lot of gray zones, it's an amazing experience. And for the right person, I would say, I think you have to look at yourself and say, what does success look like for me? What kind of cultures do I excel at? And if you don't like working in the gray, if you don't like, not sure what's going to happen tomorrow, if you don't like, I've always said, when you work in a startup, you are really laying, a lot of people say we're building the plane as we fly it. That's what a lot of people say in the business world. And when you're in a startup, you're laying the foundation or the pavement on the tarmac 5 feet in front of the plane every single day, every single month, because you're just trying to get the plane off the ground.
Wow, that's a good way to think about it. Well, I was going to ask you, everybody, especially these days, what about my work-life balance? And what I found is for a lot of startups, hey, it takes a little extra effort to get that plane off the ground, which means some other things in your life may need to be on hold. And I'm not saying it's all or nothing, but it's it's hard to be home at 3 and play with the kids if you're going to be doing something like that. Any
Yeah.
perspective on that?
Yeah, I'm probably the worst one to ask about this. If people that I work with were listening to this, they'd be laughing. But, you know, really work-life balance is challenging in startups. And part of that, it wasn't necessarily for me. It wasn't the business putting that stress on myself. It was myself putting that stress on myself. And, when you're a high functioning type A type person and you're kind of with startup and you're like, hey, failure is not an option, you're going full throttle at all times. And, myself personally, that's all I can speak for. I was probably putting in 80 hours a week for 4 straight years, and true 80 hours a week, not a roundup. We were selling globally, so I was sometimes up at 6 a.m. on calls and sometimes up till 9 p.m. on calls. Not every day, right? But those are some of the days because you're selling to, you're on calls with Europe early in the morning and you're on calls with Asia late at night because just time differences. And then you have North America in the middle. On the weekends, what I was ultimately doing was catching up, right? Because to your point, you're wearing hats, a lot of hats. And so you're just kind of catch up and set yourself up for success for the next week and to get your reports out to the rest of your leadership team members. And so, for me, it was, work-life balance was a big challenge. But I would just preface that by saying part of that challenge was I put that on myself, and, maybe 50, 30, 40% of it was the demands of the business, and 60, 70% was me. But it's not an 8 to 5, you're not going to join a startup and be successful putting in 35, 40 hours a week.
Yeah, when I took on my first kind of global role, I traveled probably 70, 80% of the time, it felt like. And when I did try to be home for weekends, which wasn't always possible. Especially like when you're out in the Middle East and their weekend is Friday, Saturday, so they work on Sunday.
Yep.
So, but I remember being home on weekends and I was just trying to recover from the week physically, just get some rest, much less, hey, let's go out to dinner, which I've been out to 5 dinners in a row already. And, I would say, you got to be fully committed, but you also, if I had to talk to my younger me, you got to make some trade-offs. You got to carve out some time for yourself because you can get at the end of that journey and you can end up divorced, no kids, because you put all your effort into that one burner being work and you paid no attention to the other ones in your life. And it's, which is even your health and your family behind it. So, again, I'm not trying to tell people it's going to be easy and you can balance it all out. It's a 9 to 5, go play golf on Fridays if you want. It ain't. But by the same token, if you're working 7 days a week, something's, falling short and on the table, and you can only do that for so long.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. And I think the challenge was sometimes when you get into these startups and you're a high functioning person, and I can relate to this, you're so deep into it, you can't see that. Right. And you're just constantly thinking about it, even on weekends, like, what do I got to do? How do I got to execute? How do we pivot if things aren't working? And, that's a little bit on myself. But as I look back and, as you gain experience and, you get a little older, you start to get a little wiser. I'm sure you can reflect on that as well. And, I probably didn't do enough of what you said of like, hey, you're going to be working 7 days a week. You need to take some time for yourself. And I think I learned that along the way. And as I look back at, the 4 years that I was in that, startup environment or early stage environment, I didn't do enough of that.
Yeah, I didn't stick to this consistently, so I'm not going to lie to you. I try to do this thing where, hey, we're going to do something every quarter, a long weekend or something where I'm going to be there for you. And it's going to be something that we're going to plan together. So it gives us something to look forward to. And there's times that, it blew up or I didn't put the time and effort to really plan it. But when I did do it and I did it consistently, it made a huge difference because it did make me feel like, okay, yeah, I'm making trade-offs, but I got this little thing coming up ahead. And it doesn't have to be, 2 weeks in Europe vacations. Sometimes it's just nice long weekends or, finding ways, even having them come on a trip with you and extending it a little. I could tell you in hindsight, I didn't do that enough.
Well, and even just, having a dinner with your wife or whatever, but, and where I sometimes fell short was you maybe make the time for dinner, but you're not present because you're thinking about everything else that's going on, and you're shaking your head like you can relate. So we're probably on the same page here.
Well, I laugh because one of the things I tried to do, this is even just last year, hey, we're going to go out date night and we're going to leave the phones in the car. Her comment, you could leave your work phone in the car. I'm in real estate. Someone could call. I'm bringing my phone in. I'm like, all right. But I did try it. I go, hey, I'm going to leave it in the car or I'm going to leave it in my pocket. The problem is if you're putting it in your pocket, as soon as that thing vibrates, you're like a moth to the flame. You can't help yourself. These devices are the most addictive things out there, and it's hard to recognize it.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. You have the ability to work from anywhere these days, which is nice in certain scenarios, but it's also the fact that you're always accessible as well.
Well, you mentioned global, and that's something that some people are more like just focused on their country of origin. But I've also in experiencing a global role, what is it like developing more of a global business, and maybe even especially today because there seems to be a lot of changes and uncertainty a little bit in the market today.
Yeah, today's interesting. When it was interesting when I went through the startup role too, because we were in the middle of COVID. And so you went from, when you're building new business, being on site and in person to build trust as a new company and as a new enterprise, it's very important. So we get going, Q4 of 2019 is when I joined, and literally 6 months later, we're in lockdown, right? And so we're pivoting, and all of a sudden we're subscribing to Zoom and we're getting on, virtual calls, and no one's turning their camera on for the first 3 to 6 months. And that evolves into what we're doing here today. And, ultimately, I think from a global perspective, it's finding the right partners in those right regions and really focusing. And so one of the things I learned over time was when you go to these global areas and you're finding partners to support you in that global environment, a lot of people go in there and they try and find 5 or 6 or 7 partners. And just my experience was like, hey, find the right partner in that country or that global region and really lean in with them. In my case, we were doing a lot of the selling with a support from a service partner, and they were awesome. We were working in Europe. We had some business going in Japan, a little bit of stuff in Israel, and then obviously North America. And we were at the peak, we were a sales team of only a couple of people, and we were managing all that. So I think it's finding the right partners and just being flexible and realizing that you're going to have to be accessible as the manufacturer or the company that's driving the business. No one cares about the business more than you do. And so they have a lot of other priorities as partners, and you have to be, kind of front and center support in that sales cycle.
Excellent. Once you got out of COVID, did you see a difference between doing business over Zoom versus meeting some of these partners face to face? And, any advice there to kind of create a better bond or connection?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, the ability to gain trust is just so much easier in person. And the first thing I noticed again when we started, doing on site or in person meetings was like, hey, we'd go out for lunch with a customer and we'd talk business for maybe the first 15, 20 minutes. Then we get into personal stuff. And then we come back to business, and you come out of there an hour and a half later, and you know what that person cares about personally. You know why they're interested in your product. When you're on Zoom, especially through COVID, it was like speed dating. You had 30-minute calls, and at 29 and a half minutes, you're like, hey, got to jump off to another call. And you didn't have time for small talk. It was just a quick presentation and gone. Whereas when you started to get in person, it was so much better because you essentially could, have that small talk before. And a lot of times you'd learn more the 20 minutes after the presentation than you would the entire presentation.
So true. Yeah, one of the things I found useful is set up 15 or 45-minute meetings. And
Mm-hmm.
you go 15 minutes, that's never enough. Well, you get to the point a lot quicker, and they usually don't have another 15-minute meeting afterwards. So if
Yeah,
it goes
fair.
a little over, they're a little bit more relaxed to give you more time. Same thing with 45. Well, I didn't commit for an hour, but hey, everybody needs a bathroom break, by the way, during the day. So back to back calls do not work.
Yep.
I lived it and it sucked. So if we do 45 minutes, even if they only give you 5 minutes more and then they take a break, it's 5 minutes more you wouldn't have gotten if you would have done it at the 60-minute mark. And it allows you to kind of manage your time a little better. I don't know. It just seemed a little trick that I used to kind of run, and it really helped me be a little bit more effective.
Yeah, 100%. It just, I mean, I don't know. There's something about being in person and building trust. And like I said, when you're a young enterprise, all you're doing is trying to build trust, because at the end of the day, they're going to look at you and assess you and say, hey, they're going to discount you right away because you're a new company.
100%. In fact, and I love your opinion on this. These days, especially since the market's gotten a little tougher, people are a little uncertain. I see people doing more in person, not less. People wanting to push people out. There's a company I invested in, and one of the things that one of my partners rolled out was this old, I think it's in a United Airlines video. And this guy comes out and he goes, our first customer just fired us today. And we're going to get out there, and everybody's getting tickets to different customers. And they ask him, where are you going? He goes, I'm going back to our first customer to find out why he fired us and see if there's anything I can do about it.
Yep.
And I kind of feel that wave coming out now, like getting back to in person. Don't just rely on a text, a phone call, a Zoom meeting. Get back in front of them, and it doesn't mean you got to be there always. But once, like you said, you have that dinner, you learn about their family. The next week, when you're back in the office and you're talking over Zoom, it's a different relationship now.
Yep. And I think, I think about it in like depths of communication. So, the first layer of depth is an email, right? Maybe a LinkedIn message or an email. And then you get on a Zoom call. That's the second layer of depth. And then you get on site. That's the third layer of depth. And typically you don't get onto a text relationship until after that first visit, right? And then you're like, hey, what's your cell phone? And, the person trusts you and they know that you've got, their best interest at heart. And then, it kind of evolves from there. So I look at that as the depths. And as you're gradually gaining trust, you're kind of going through those depths of like, highest levels email, and everybody has email. And then the second level is like doing what we're doing here on virtual. And then third is on site. And once you get past into the text message, I think, you kind of feel like that trust is at least there and the intent is right.
It's funny because, and maybe it's an age thing on my side. I'm more apprehensive to text someone on their personal phone if I haven't established some trust and rapport. But what I also find is some younger folks like, what are you talking about? I told you to text me, text me.
Yeah. Well, and everybody prefers different communication. And, so I think sometimes, everybody back in the day used to call your cell phone and leave a voicemail. And I've always said, if you're sitting on a plane at 8 o'clock at night and you're boarding a plane and someone's sitting there waiting for takeoff and they're scrolling through their text and they can jump in and respond to you, they're not going to
quickly.
call you back on the tarmac, right? So at 8 o'clock at night, and they know that you'll respond when you get it and can respond. And so it just kind of is, it's kind of evolving too a little bit. And, we're even getting to the point now where I think email is becoming a little bit challenging because people get 300 emails a day and you just get lost in the shuffle. So
It's funny. I just did a podcast on that. Getting through the email, overwhelmed, environment that we get through these. Like you said, I don't have another day of my week that I can just go look through email. So a lot of them unless they capture my attention, they get unnoticed and unread.
yep. And then if you can't get through on email, then you got to start using social media or text if you have it. But the best way to do it obviously is to gain the trust first. So
All right. So what piece of advice do you give folks when you get into a startup? Is there any advice you'd give some, how do you succeed in an environment like that? When so many things are out of your control, what might be some of the things that are in your control that you could really take advantage of?
yeah, I think controlling what you can control, and that one of them is your attitude. One of those is your work ethic. Obviously, one of those is making sure you understand the expectations coming in, and I think one of the most important pieces here is really not attaching your identity to an outcome or a business. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, and I struggle with that personally, and that's a personal thing. But I talk to a lot of people now that have gone through either startups or challenging business situations or early stage companies. And when you attach your identity to an outcome or a business, and that business either doesn't do well or maybe struggles a little bit, it really wears on you. And so control what you can control, I think, and make sure your expectations are aligned, that you're walking into a startup. It's going to be different than a 9 to 5. You're going to have some sacrifices that you're going to have to make, and the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow will hopefully be worth it. But maybe just don't attach your identity to it. And if I can say one more thing, Carlos, I think it's I think everybody has to define their own version of success. And I've kind of gone through this as I kind of transition out of the startup world, where I've got this saying that says you cannot achieve success through the eyes of another human. And so really what that's saying is define your own success and start to work towards it, put your system in place versus looking for an external validation of success. So
Love it. All right. Tell us a little bit about your background, Dustin. Why should people listen to you?
yeah, listen, I mean, I've been in this food ingredient industry for 17, 18 years. I always say I'm a builder, and I'm a builder because I love building global business, kind of the stuff we talked about today. I'm also a big fan of investing, and, building horizontal income streams, I think is awesome. I'm, very passionate about my career and love the industry that I'm in and want to stay in that industry and continue to excel there. But at the same time, I'm really passionate about financial independence as well. And so, when people follow me on LinkedIn or whatever social media, I'll be not only posting some stuff about the industry that I'm in, but the podcast is, we say it's for earners looking to achieve success through money and mindset. And so if you really boil down things, you're really looking for independence and purpose. I think Morgan Housel said that, and it really resonated with me. And so I'm always posting stuff about, career and ultimately building horizontal income streams, to move you more towards financial independence.
Love it. What's that one piece of advice that you would give the audience that would help them be as successful as you have been?
I think it comes back to that saying I just had, and that was, you cannot achieve success through the eyes of another human. And I really believe that. And so, so many of us, to just elaborate on that, so many of us don't establish what success means. And we just keep, that's the reason why the podcast that I run is called Chasing Goalposts, right? We set a goal, we hit it, we move the goalpost, and we just keep going on the hedonic treadmill. And so I think really the important part for me, is I couldn't I couldn't answer the question, what am I chasing? And I think if a lot of people that are listening to this podcast sit down and say, what am I truly chasing in life? They might have a hard time, answering that question. And so really, start to establish, what are you chasing in life and what does success mean, and make sure that your version of success is what you're truly working towards and not someone else's.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, when I used to have this worldwide VP role, I had this huge team across the globe. I had a great admin. I had people that I've worked with for 10 plus years, and I was miserable. I was on phone calls 12 hours a day. I was feeling like I was getting further and further away from customers, which was the fun part of my job, and working with teams on projects and getting more into more of the back office political mind games of just trying to survive in the pool. And it took me a while to just realize that, hey, I got here. This is great, but it's not what I thought it was going to be. And I really don't enjoy it. And it took me a while to make that realization, to make a shift. And that's what got me into the whole sales training thing, which I thought I was actually going to only do for like 6 months to a year. And here I am 16 plus years later.
Yep. Well, you love it, and it's fulfilling for you, and it's clearly what success means to you. So that's awesome. I'm happy for you.
I think a lot of people are looking for purpose these days. I think it's going through COVID, a little rockiness at the market, little uncertainty, and people start taking a step back and go, "Hey, what do I really want to do?" And a good friend of mine's looking at making a complete shift from IT to maybe running a franchise. Other people I know are looking at looked at one of my other good buddies retired early and is loving it. So I think you're onto something about looking for a purpose, because there's a lot of people out there that I think are asking themselves the same question.
Yep, 100%. Well, hopefully they can find that, and I know that I was on a journey to find that myself, and it's a lot funner in life if you can answer what you're chasing, and it's a lot easier to put systems in place to achieve it when you know what you're chasing.
So Dustin, if people want to get to know you better, get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn for sure. So
excellent. Well, Dustin, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. It was a good conversation, and I'm looking forward to listening to more of your podcasts.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was an enjoyable conversation, Carlos. I really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. This does it for this week's episode. Please take a listen, comment back. I'd love to hear from you. And until next week, I wish you nothing but the greatest success.